The Galactic Empire had always thrived on domination. Its history was a catalog of conquest, each species subdued under the crushing weight of its fleets, each resistance extinguished with fire and steel. The Empire expanded like a wildfire, consuming every system it touched, believing itself invincible. When humans arrived on a galactic stage, the Empire viewed them as yet another primitive death world species, dangerous perhaps, but ultimately manageable. They were catalogued, studied, and dismissed. The Empire failed to see the humans as anything but a minor threat, another wild species that could be tamed or eradicated if necessary. Their warnings were ignored, their diplomacy mocked, their tenacity misinterpreted as desperation. Humans approached the Empire through formal diplomatic channels, proposing peaceful cooperation and trade. They sent envoys with open hands, not clenched fists. They spoke in measured tones, offering to integrate respectfully into the galactic community. The Empire scoffed. It believed power was the only language that mattered, and when humans did not bark a defiance or crawl in submission, they were labeled weak. The Galactic Council saw the signs. The lesser species whispered warnings. They had seen fragments of human history, the relentless wars, the savage survival on a death world, but the Empire waved them off. Legends, exaggerations, irrelevant to the might of the Empire. The Empire's disdain deepened when humans refused to yield territorial claims along the frontier. Skirmishes occurred. Human colonies repelled Imperial patrols with startling efficiency, but the Empire misread these as flukes, isolated incidents. When humans proposed a high-level diplomatic summit to resolve disputes, the Empire interpreted this as an admission of fear. They agreed not to negotiate, but to display dominance. 3 human diplomats arrived at an Imperial-controlled neutral station. They carried formal credentials, peaceful intentions, and the expectation of civilized discourse. Instead, they were arrested on fabricated charges of espionage within hours of arrival. The Empire staged a public execution, fully aware it would be broadcast across the galactic network. They wanted to send a message. They wanted to crush human pride, to remind the galaxy of their place. The execution was deliberately brutal. The final moments of the diplomats stretched into a spectacle. No pleas, no struggle. The humans accepted their fate with a calm that unsettled even the executioners. The broadcast ignited outrage across neutral species. Several minor factions cut ties with the Empire immediately. Long-standing Imperial allies urged restraint. But the Empire laughed. They had shattered human dignity, and there was no retaliation, no fleets, no threats, no declaration of war, just silence. The Empire mistook this silence for submission, believing they had cowed humanity. Some within the Empire warned that this was not over, that the humans' lack of response was not a sign of weakness, but a harbinger of something worse. Their warnings were ignored. Among the neutral species, the silence was deafening. They had seen the human diplomats face death without fear, had seen no desperate calls for rescue, no last-minute bargaining. The humans had accepted the execution too easily, and it lingered in the minds of those who understood Deathworlders. They knew that humans were not creatures that surrendered to inevitability. They adapted, endured, retaliated. The absence of immediate reprisal sowed unease among those who had studied them. The Empire tightened its grip on human-adjacent territories, escalating patrols and increasing military presence. But the humans remained quiet. They issued no demands. They did not amass fleets along borders. Trade routes stayed open, communications unbroken, as if the execution had been forgotten. This behavior puzzled Imperial analysts. Some suggested the humans had been bluffing all along, that their stories of resilience were overblown. Others, more cautious, began to suspect that the humans had never intended to prevent the execution. They argued that the humans had wanted it to happen. Internal disagreements fractured the Imperial Council. One faction urged a total invasion of human space to eliminate the potential threat. Another advised pulling back, citing mounting political pressure from neutral systems disturbed by the Empire's conduct. Still, the Empire had never been known for patience. Convinced of its superiority, it expanded deeper into contested zones. Meanwhile, whispers began to spread. Imperial supply convoys reported strange anomalies, disruptions in navigational beacons, transit sensor ghosts, pirate attacks that seemed unnervingly precise. Entire cargo fleets vanished without a trace. Imperial intelligence dismissed these incidents as coincidental, the inevitable cost of overextension. The truth was considered too absurd to entertain. The possibility that the humans were not preparing for war, but had already started it, was discarded on the fringes of imperial space. Colonies loyal to the Empire faced sudden uprisings. Rebel groups that had languished for decades suddenly acquired advanced weaponry and intelligence. They struck with uncanny timing, crippling key infrastructure. It was as if someone had handed them the Empire's playbook. Imperial commanders struggled to contain the spread, but each attempt to restore order was thwarted by unexpected ambushes and system-wide malfunctions. The humans remained silent. No formal declarations. No public statements. Only silence. Imperial networks began to suffer strange intrusions. Classified files vanished. Propaganda broadcasts were interrupted by brief, cryptic messages. At first, they were dismissed as technical errors. Then the messages became unmistakable. Coordinates, names, dates, each correlating to catastrophic failures or targeted assassinations within the Empire. Panic began to ripple through the military ranks. Commanders rotated their security teams, changed protocols, but the attacks continued with surgical precision. The notion that the humans had set this in motion from the moment of the execution started to gain traction. The diplomats had gone to their deaths without protest, their mission completed not in words, but in positioning. Investigations revealed that the neutral station where the execution had taken place had later become a hub for unexplained data traffic and signal anomalies. What was initially dismissed as background noise was, upon closer analysis, a coordinated activation of hidden systems. Someone had embedded subspace nodes deep within the station's infrastructure. These nodes had spread, piggybacking across Imperial communication relays and cargo manifests, seeding themselves throughout the Empire's logistical web. The diplomats had delivered more than messages. They had delivered the entry points for an invisible invasion. Imperial leadership resisted accepting the implications. The suggestion that 3 diplomats, fully aware of their fate, had willingly walked into a trap they themselves were setting was too unnerving. Yet the evidence mounted. The collapse of supply lines, the precision of rebel strikes, the systemic failures. It was all too orchestrated. Human fingerprints were everywhere, but no human fleets had been sighted. No direct confrontations reported. The supply convoys that once flowed seamlessly through the Empire's trade routes began to vanish. Reports from captains were fragmented, often ending mid-transmission with no trace of the vessels found. Imperial authorities dismissed them as isolated incidents at first, blaming pirates, hyperspace anomalies, and navigational errors. But the patterns became undeniable. Convoys disappeared at critical junctions, precisely where the loss would have the most impact on military logistics. Entire sectors found themselves cut off from essential supplies. Attempts to reroute convoys through safer lanes resulted in the same vanishing outcomes, as if the humans already knew the adjustments before they were made. Imperial engineers struggled to explain the sudden failures plaguing their communication arrays. Long-range transmissions degraded into incomprehensible static, while navigational beacons flickered or went entirely dark. Fleets deployed to investigate found no wreckage, no evidence of conflict, just silence and absence. Black markets flooded with advanced weapons, equipment that bore unmistakable human signatures but had never been seen before. Pirate factions, previously disorganized scavengers, now conducted coordinated strikes with impossible precision, attacking Imperial assets with knowledge they should not have possessed. The Empire's economic infrastructure began to tremble under the weight of these disruptions. Strategic resources vanished from the supply chain. Starship production slowed as critical components failed to arrive. The Empire's financial institutions faced sudden instability as trade routes collapsed. Panic spread among merchant guilds and logistics officials, their carefully maintained schedules crumbling. Imperial economists sounded the alarm, warning a systemic collapse if the disruptions continued. But the military leadership dismissed them. The humans had not fired a shot. Therefore, there was no war. Allied factions that had long depended on Imperial strength began to reconsider their allegiances. Minor species that had once been quick to pledge loyalty now hesitated, pulling their diplomats from Imperial worlds, quietly negotiating with rival powers, or outright declaring neutrality. Some Imperial client states severed ties completely, citing the Empire's apparent inability to maintain security. Rebel factions, long suppressed, ignited across multiple sectors. They struck with alarming coordination, as if connected by an unseen command. Their attacks targeted key fuel depots, hyperspace gates, and military outposts with near-perfect timing. Imperial intelligence worked furiously to trace the source of the coordinated rebellions. Analysis revealed an unsettling pattern. The rebels always seemed to strike shortly after classified Imperial movements were finalized. Defensive measures were consistently outmaneuvered. No spies were caught. No transmissions intercepted. The possibility emerged that the Empire's own networks had been compromised at the foundational level. Evidence began to point back to the neutral station where the human diplomats had been executed. Hidden subspace nodes had been seeded across the Empire's infrastructure, silent carriers of information, activated precisely after the execution. Imperial fleet commanders grew paranoid. Orders were delayed by layers of verification protocols. Some commanders refused to transmit plans over standard channels, relying on face-to-face relays, but sabotage still followed them. Engineers discovered software embedded deep within navigation and logistics systems, written in cryptographic patterns never seen before, but now recognized as human in origin. The scale of infiltration was staggering. It had gone unnoticed for months, possibly years. The human diplomats had been the delivery mechanism, their presence the opening move in a war that was never declared. Entire fleets found themselves stranded as refueling stations malfunctioned or exploded under carefully timed detonations. Hyperspace routes were subtly altered by tampered beacons, sending Imperial vessels into ambushes or gravitational traps. Pirates, insurgents, and seemingly unaffiliated mercenaries struck with an efficiency that suggested foreknowledge. The humans themselves remained absent, their fleet unseen, their voices silent. Imperial commanders demanded answers from the central government. They needed a target to strike, a visible enemy to destroy. Without it, their grip on their forces and territories weakened. Propaganda efforts intensified, framing the humans as cowards who fought from the shadows. But these messages found little purchase. The soldiers on the ground and the officers on the bridges saw the pattern. They knew the Empire was not holding its ground. It was being dismantled. Internal factions within the Empire began to fracture. The military leadership blamed the intelligence branches for their failure to predict or prevent the unraveling. The intelligence agencies accused the logistics corps of gross negligence. Political elites scrambled to distance themselves from the decisions that led to the execution, each faction seeking to deflect the inevitable fallout. Assassination surged as Imperial leaders turned on one another, each suspecting their rivals of colluding with the humans. On the Outer Rim, entire sectors declared independence, seizing the moment to free themselves from Imperial rule. These breakaway regions faced little resistance. Imperial fleets either abandoned their posts or were too crippled by logistical failures to respond. The rebellions, once scattered, now formed a loose confederation, united not by ideology but by survival and opportunity. They all recognized the human silent hand in their victories. Imperial High Command deployed elite counterintelligence teams to hunt down the origin of the human network. Operations were launched against suspected rebel leaders, pirate enclaves, and neutral data hubs. Yet each operation failed spectacularly, as if their movements were anticipated. Internal security protocols flagged recurring anomalies tied to the very encryption systems distributed after the execution. The Empire's most secure files had been compromised long before the first supply convoy disappeared. Psychological strain rippled through the Empire's ranks. Commanders began to fear speaking openly, convinced that their words were no longer safe. Paranoia infected every layer of command. Soldiers executed their own officers on suspicion of treason. Fleets hesitated to respond to new threats, fearful that any action might be playing into human hands. Entire battalions deserted, their ships vanishing into periphery, where they were later seen fighting alongside rebel factions. Human-generated data fragments began appearing within Imperial communication streams, taunting messages embedded in logistical codes, sometimes nothing more than a name, a date, or a set of coordinates. Each time, they corresponded to the next catastrophic failure, the next missing convoy, the next dead admiral. The pattern was undeniable. The humans were not simply fighting a war. They were orchestrating the Empire's collapse with precision. The few Imperial analysts who survived long enough to compile their findings reached a chilling conclusion. The humans had engineered a cascading failure from the moment their diplomats were captured. The execution was a key that had unlocked the preceded infiltration. The Empire had delivered its own death warrant in front of the entire galaxy, all under the illusion of power.